guys, welcome back to the channel. Welcome if you're new here. Hey, hello, my name is Angela, and today's video is going to be another episode of The Legal Breakdown. As you saw in the title, we're going to be talking about infamous lawyers, specifically Jose Baez. So if you guys are like me and love true crime, I feel like in my past life, I was probably a lawyer, but I was a criminal law lawyer. So I love true crime. I love cases. I love watching trials. I love all of that good stuff, even though that is not the path that I chose for my legal career. If you guys are new to the channel, I am a corporate business lawyer. I don't even go to court, but I love watching court trials, and I love watching defense attorneys specifically and prosecutors specifically and their strategies of how they defend and prosecute people. Of course, with most true crime, you hear about the case, the details of the case, the defendants, the victims, and all sorts of information like that. But rarely do you find true crime that talks about the strategy of the defense attorney or the prosecution and how they either convicted someone or someone got acquitted of a crime. But every now and then there will be certain stories that kind of are picked up by the media. And then when this happens, there tends to be somewhat more of a focus on the attorney of usually the defendant or sometimes the prosecution. And you get a little bit more curious and you find out a little bit more about who is defending a person in, say, a murder trial or something like that. Usually they're very, high profile, sexy trials like murders and things like that. So I figured we'd talk about some of the most famous, or depending on who you ask, infamous attorneys, you guys. So in today's episode, we're going to be talking about Jose Baez. Many people are familiar with Jose Baez because he is most notably the defense attorney of Casey Anthony. The Casey Anthony trial, many of you guys know it, we'll get into it in this video, but it was his claim to fame. His career skyrocketed after he represented Casey Anthony in her murder charges. It was a death penalty case, but murder charges for allegedly killing her 2-year-old daughter, Kaylee Anthony. But before we get into his winning defense strategy, we're just going to talk a little bit about Jose Baez and who he was prior to law school and how he got into his legal journey. Because again, this video is more so about the man behind the defendant, the attorney. Jose Baez was born in Manhattan, New York. He grew up mostly in New York and then in South Florida. He was the son of what I believe was immigrant parents, and unlike your traditional superstar lawyer story, he was a high school dropout. He dropped out of high school in 9th grade. He got his GED, and he also became a husband and a father at the young age of 17 years old. Once he got his GED, he went ahead and joined the Navy and actually worked in Central Intelligence in the Navy and was highly trained in that and had some really good experience. After being in the Navy for a while, he then went on to community college and then university. He graduated college and then attended law school at St. Thomas University in Miami, Florida. While he was in law school, he did a short stint of an internship at the prosecutor's office and then switched over to the public defender's office, which he liked a lot better. He was mentored by public defender Rick DeMaria in Miami, and he had a passion for being in the courtroom. He loved being in the courtroom and he loved working at the public defender's office. He had a deep interest in criminal defense work, and that interest grew even more as he watched Johnny Cochran defend O.J. Simpson in the O.J. Simpson trial. So Baez graduated from law school, but unlike most law grads, he did not get admitted into the bar right away. The Florida State Bar actually denied his admission to the bar due to what they called financial irresponsibility. He had bounced some checks, some back child support, student loan debt, and had even filed for bankruptcy. So he got denied admission to the bar. Although he graduated from law school, he still was not practicing law and instead picked up a job doing criminal investigative work. He also worked at LexisNexis, which is a legal research company. And in 2005, he was finally admitted to the Florida bar. Now let's kind of talk about that. So he graduated from law school in 1997. He didn't get admitted to the bar to practice law until 2005. He didn't become an attorney until 8 years after he graduated law school. But as soon as he got admitted, he got to work. His primary practice was, of course, criminal defense, and he had some pretty notable cases. He represented a woman who was accused of kidnapping her friend's daughter. He worked on a murder trial of a man who was accused of killing his girlfriend's daughter. So he did have some experience, but he wasn't a greatly experienced attorney once he took the Casey Anthony trial. So now we get to the Casey Anthony case. So he became an attorney of Casey Anthony kind of by chance. When she was arrested for the murder of her daughter, a fellow inmate had referred her to Jose Baez, and that's how they got to working together. Now, many of you are probably familiar with the Casey Anthony trial, but for those of you who are not, we're going to talk a little bit about the case so you guys can kind of get some of the facts, so you guys can understand how just incredulous it was that Jose Baez was able to get Casey Anthony acquitted, okay? We're going to talk about the facts of the case, we're going to talk about his winning strategy, and we're going to talk a little bit about where he is now. So let's jump right in. So Casey Anthony, as I mentioned already, was accused of killing her 2-year-old daughter. Now, this case got highly publicized, okay? It was a huge case. It was on every news station. Everyone knew about it. And the reason why, I think, is because of some of the facts here in the case. So Casey Anthony was the daughter of Cindy and George Anthony. She had a 2-year-old daughter, Kaylee, and she kind of lived with her parents, but you know, she was 22 years old, 21, 22 years old. And so, you know, she wasn't the most stable. Kaylee, her daughter, spent a lot of time with her grandparents. Her grandparents were used to seeing her pretty much every day. And then one day, Kaylee wasn't coming around. And, you know, the grandparents started to, you know, kind of get, where's Kaylee at? We haven't seen our granddaughter. And so this kind of leads into some of the crazy facts about the case. So for about a month, the grandparents did not see Kaylee Anthony, right? But when they were asking Casey about it, they saw Casey, but not Kaylee. When they asked Casey about it, she said Kaylee was with the nanny. She said she had been working at Universal Studios, like herself was working at Universal Studios. Remember, they're in Florida. And she just kept making excuses for why Kaylee wasn't around. This went on for about a month. And finally, you know, after a whole series of events, which we won't get into, I will link such good resources, you guys, and you guys can really get into the case, the trial, the testimony. It's good stuff, but this is really not the focus. The focus is Jose. So I will link, so if you want to know more about the case, but essentially Kaylee was missing for 30 days before her mom said anything. And once her mom said something, she said Kaylee had been kidnapped by her nanny. So once Casey revealed this information about Kaylee's whereabouts, her mom, Cindy Anthony, called the police. And this is how the whole investigation and case really unfolded. So Cindy Anthony, the grandmother, called the police, said she had been missing. She said she had been missing for about a month and her daughter just admitted it. Remember I said that Casey said that Kaylee was kidnapped by the nanny. She had been telling people that Kaylee was with the nanny this whole time. There was no nanny and Casey had no job. She had been lying for a full month about, you know, there being a nanny, her going to work, just all sorts of things. So after weeks and weeks of searching for Kaylee, her body was found terribly decomposed in some woods near the Anthony's home. There's all sorts of facts that put Casey in a bad light. During the time that her daughter was supposedly missing, she was out partying, living life with her boyfriend, acting normal. She had abandoned her vehicle that was actually in the name of her parents that got towed. When the parents went to pick it up, the trunk smelled really badly, kind of likened to what a dead body, a decomposed dead body would smell like. I mean, there's so many facts in the case, you guys, that kind of were pointing to the possibility that Casey might have something to do with her daughter's missing and then eventually, you know, when they found the body, death. So essentially, Casey was arrested and accused of murdering her 2-year-old daughter, Kaylee. Now comes in Jose Baez. Before we talk about Jose Baez and his defense of Casey Anthony, Jose Baez was highly talked about in the media. He got a lot of criticism for a lot of people. He was called a rookie. He was called a bozo. People talked about the fact that he wasn't even initially admitted to the bar. People were saying he was wildly inexperienced to be handling a murder trial, let alone a death penalty murder trial. He had all sorts of criticism. There also were some issues kind of during the trial with him making really bad objections and breaking the rules and cross-examination, and also being kind of disciplined by the judge, or, you know, admonished by the judge. And so Jose did not have the best reputation as he was defending Casey Anthony. He was highly talked about in the news. So as you've guessed by now, Casey was ultimately acquitted of the murder charges. There were things that she was charged with, but the big one, the big kahuna, the murder, the death penalty. She didn't even get manslaughter. She was acquitted of the murder charges. And depending on who you ask, some people say that it was due to the genius and skill of Jose Baez, okay? Like I said, some people think he's great. Some people think he just got lucky. I don't have a dog in the fight. I'm just gonna talk about his strategy and some things that probably helped him win the case. And like I said, I'll link some videos to the trial because I actually watched his opening statement, his cross-examination, closing statement. And so I wanted to make sure I had a good understanding of his strategy and how he was able to win a case that seemed unwinnable. So in his opening statement, Jose threw a wrench in the whole story, okay? So all this time, the trial took place in 2011, okay? Kaylee went missing and was found, you know, her remains were found in 2008. So it was 3 years. 3 years. This whole 3 years, the story was that Kaylee was missing and someone murdered her, allegedly her mom, and dumped her in the woods, right? Jose Baez, along with other things, in the opening statement said that the missing story was a lie. So he said it right there. The story that she was missing was a lie. Instead, he claimed that Kaylee had drowned in the family swimming pool and Casey Anthony and her father, George Anthony, covered it up. Now, he did shed light on the fact that although tragic if she did drown, the actions following that of trying to cover it up are not good. But here's where he went with that. He accused Casey's dad of sexually abusing her. He dismantled the Anthony family, saying that they had all sorts of secrets, that things weren't what they seemed, that Casey had suffered years of abuse, and this was all a coping mechanism of trying to pretend like everything's okay. He basically said she's been pretending like things are okay her whole life, and so when this happened, she did the same thing. She said Kaylee drowned, she went to her father said, your mother's never gonna forgive you. Then he helped her cover it up. And the reason why Casey was acting normal, out partying, acting like, you know, Kaylee was with the nanny when all this time she knew that Kaylee had drowned, is because she was coping with the results of the abuse that she suffered from her father all these years. So he just completely dragged Casey's father into it and said, hey, he was a part of it too, and he's the cause of why Casey acts this way, because he abused her and he just threw a wrench in the whole story. One fact that he did point out that I thought was pretty genius was he mentioned how in Florida, the #1 cause of death of children are swimming pools. So he said that at that time, the #1 cause of death for children was drowning in swimming pools. So, you know, he put that fact in there to bolster it up. Like, this is not an uncommon thing. The only thing that's uncommon is how they reacted. Instead of calling the police, they tried to cover it up. Casey went along with it because she had suffered so much abuse. She was used to covering things up. That's how her family operated, and that's what we're gonna do now. And I will say, I can imagine how that might raise some concerns for a jury and think, hey, I know we just heard everything the prosecution said, and they said everything about Casey and all this lying that she did, but this could be possible. So he opened up that doubt, you know. I'm sure the prosecution believed they had a very strong case. The way the media was working, it was looking like Casey was a gone girl. But the way Jose Baez delivered his opening and closing statement, he casted doubt on the prosecution's story. And that's what you have to do as a defense attorney. Because there's one thing to remember. When you're defending someone, the burden of proof is not on you. Okay? The burden of proof is on the prosecution to prove that whatever they're saying happened beyond a reasonable doubt. So if you as the defense attorney can cast doubt on the prosecution's case, you have a chance, okay? Because that's the way the law works. One thing he did really well was remind the jury of this, right? He said, hey, even if you think Casey's a bad person, she's the party girl, she's this, she's that, she's whatever, you have to remain focused. You have to remain on justice. The question here isn't whether Casey was a party girl. The question here isn't whether Casey has good morals. The question here isn't whether Casey's a good person. The question here is, how did Casey die? And it is the burden of the prosecution to prove that. He warned the jury not to get distracted by emotion. He said, let the law guide you. Remain focused. He said that several times. Remain focused. He reminded them that speculation wasn't enough. He reminded them, hey, all this sensationalizing in the news, not enough. He said that the prosecutors could not prove how Kaylee died, and that is the only issue and focus in the case. He iterated how the prosecution was wanting to take someone's life, because it was a death penalty, off of speculation when they could not prove how Kaylee died. And so let's talk about that a little bit, because one plus that he had on his side is the fact that Kaylee's body was so decomposed by the time it was found that the medical examiners, they didn't know how she died. Her body was too decomposed to figure that out. They did rule it a homicide, but they couldn't tell you how. And Jose Baez jumped on that. He reiterated that throughout the trial. There are about 4 main points that he really focused on. So the first one was what happened to Kaylee. He gave his story of her drowning in the pool, and he said that's what's really happened to her. The second thing he did was shift the focus from Casey to other people. And so one, that was Casey's father, George Anthony, and then 2, there was the guy who found Kaylee's body in the woods. His name was Roy Kronk. He talked a lot about him and casted some doubt on the events of him finding the body. He didn't blame him for the death of Kaylee because, like, according to him, she drowned, but he did allude to some wrongdoing on his part to kind of help the detectives' investigation. Another thing he focused on was he talked a lot about how the investigators only focused on Casey from the beginning, that they were laser focused on her and didn't really look into any other avenues because they wanted her to be the person. They made it up in their mind and they did everything they could to try to point all the evidence to her because that was their main focus. So he talked about that a lot. On several occasions, he referred to the detectives who were investigating the case as being desperate. Kind of in that same realm, he talked a lot about the car because the dead body smell that I mentioned before was a huge thing, you know, in the case, and he casted some doubt on the car and who had control over it and kind of shifted that focus back on Casey's dad. And he also focused on the fact that there was no evidence that could definitively, you know, place Kaylee in the trunk of Casey's car or tie Casey directly to her daughter's death. That was a huge thing because there was no evidence to link Casey to Kaylee's body. And, you know, you need evidence. And like I said, the body was decomposed, so there was nothing there. They call that a dry bones case. So those cases are really hard to prove because the body's decomposed so badly. So I think Jose's winning strategy was deflecting, you know, deflecting against Casey, bringing up the father, making her more of the victim, talking about abuse. He talked a lot about the fact that the prosecution couldn't prove their burden. His own words were that reasonable doubt was sprinkled throughout the case. So ultimately his stance and his message to the jury was, hey, look, this was a sad and tragic accident, okay? But the events that happened, the actions of Casey does not amount to manslaughter or murder. And that was Jose's winning strategy. So yeah, you guys, like I said, Casey ended up getting acquitted of the murder charges. She did get convicted of some lesser charges, but she had already been serving 3 years in prison. So she was out shortly after that. She got all sorts of threats because, like I said, in the eyes of the media, this was a slam dunk case, you know, all the lies and her image, but Jose and her defense team got her off. And I think it's important to kind of get into the details of the trial and the strategies of both the prosecution and the defense, and also how things work under the letter of the law, because I think sensationalism and the media and emotion can sometimes drive people to deem someone guilty or not guilty. But in reality, that is not how the law works, especially criminal law, because you have to prove something happened beyond reasonable doubt. Unfortunately though, in my opinion, the justice system typically is flawed, because a lot of times it's not about whether you did it or not. It's about how good your attorney is, or did the investigation go right? Was there a mess up? Were the right motions and calls made during court? Like I said, some people say Jose Baez is a genius. Some say he was just lucky. Legal analyst Bill Schaefer at the time referred to him as a rookie playing in the Super Bowl. And I thought that was a great analogy, because like I said, he'd only been practicing for 3 years when Casey Anthony was arrested. So he wasn't somebody you'd be expecting to represent somebody in a death penalty case. So everyone has their opinions and you can take it for what it is. But that leads us into, what is he doing now? What is Jose Baez doing now? Like I alluded to before, this case put Jose on the map. If he was a rookie then, he is not a rookie anymore, you guys. He's still practicing law. He owns his own law firm. He's a best-selling author. He's written several books about his cases and his clients. He's also a Harvard law professor, where he teaches law students about trial techniques. Additionally, he's a speaker and a lecturer. So of course, you know, I can imagine that he gets these engagements to come speak because he's Jose Baez, the guy who got Casey Anthony off. And you know, now he's worked on many notable cases. You know, his career skyrocketed after that. He's worked on some pretty high profile cases. He was the attorney for Aaron Hernandez, the NFL player who was on trial for murder and ultimately ended up committing suicide. If you remember that case, Aaron Hernandez was on trial for one murder and then was on trial for a double murder. Jose Baez represented him in the double murder trial and got him off, and was actually working on his appeal for the other murder case that he got convicted of. But then of course he died. He also was an attorney for Harvey Weinstein. We all know that story. So yeah, he has picked up some really, really notable cases and continues to do so. No matter your thoughts about Jose Baez, I think his story is pretty compelling, especially his background, his difficulty being admitted to the bar, and where he is now. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. We will be doing more of these. I'm thinking the next one might be Johnny Cochran, because everybody knows Johnny Cochran. Actually, Jose Baez has been likened to Johnny Cochran, basically saying he's, you know, the second Johnny Cochran. So be on the lookout for the next video. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Comment down below before you leave. Peace.